This is Matthew McConaughey.
Natalie Portman.
James Patterson.
Michael Ian Black.
And you are listening to
5 Questions
with Dan
Schawbel.
Gabore, welcome to 5 Questions.
Thanks for having me.
How did you handle family members bullying you about your weight as a child? And then did losing those 100 pounds during surgery impact your self-esteem?
Did it impact my self-esteem? I think it did. But, self-esteem issues will be there and body issues will be, around as long as I have a body. And so every day is a battle with, between me and my self-esteem. But every day I'm getting bigger. Well, not that I'm getting bigger. I'm getting better at battling those voices in my head. And the way I dealt with feeling bullied as a child, I don't know if I necessarily felt bullied. I didn't, I'm not sure that I felt like I was being bullied, even though I was. I just sort of kept pressing on. I always found my emotions to be inconvenient at that time. And so I would just keep pressing on no matter what they said, no matter how I felt, I would just keep pressing on.
I love to hear that. I think bullying has taken on like a whole new meaning because it used to be you go to, school and get bullied, or if you're even starring in a movie, maybe, you get some blowback from, a review site like a New York Times, but now it's all on social media. And so I feel like everything's been amplified. So it's like, you post something and someone's going to be negative. So it almost takes like more confidence to be able to, rise above that and not let it affect you.
Certainly it is a strange thing because back in the 80s and 90s when we were kids getting bullied, it wasn't necessarily in front of the entire world. And so, that weird feeling when you walk into a room and everyone was talking about you and so they stop, but amplified that by not just the classroom, but the whole school, and not just the school, but the district, and not the district, but the city and the town and in the entire world. And so bullying is much more intense than it used to be.
Absolutely. And you're known for that famous tweet where, people made fun of you and you really kind of shoved it back in and say, hey, I'm doing real well.
That could have been 100 tweets.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I think you've learned to push back really, really hard at people. And, I think over time, it somewhat gets desensitized. Like it bothered me a lot more in my, teens and early 20s and not as much now. So I think it's over time, you're like, well, I've already proved myself to myself. I'm doing great. So and you kind of grow up and mature, you're, engaged, you're moved on with your life. So it's kind of behind you, even though it might still affect you a little bit.
My voice is the loudest though. I affect myself the most. And I don't, what? There hasn't been a new way to call me fat since I was in maybe 3rd grade. And so there's just nothing new. I've heard everything at this point. Everything. So yeah, it doesn't affect me the same way.
And after starting your career with your breakout role in Precious, how did you choose your next project?
I really was just I was so young back then. I think about it all the time. I was so young and I wasn't even that young. By the time Precious came out, I think I was 26 years old. And I also did the entire, time I was waiting for it to come out. I didn't know if I would ever work again. And so when it did come out, I was very surprised that I wasn't just taking anything that was offered to me, out of fear. I chose projects based on whether or not they seemed fun. I think my next project was Victoria Mahoney film, Yelling to the Sky. And it was a teenage drama. And I thought it would be really, really fun to be a teenager again for a little bit. And then I did The Big C, and I thought it would be really incredible working with Laura Linney. And so that's how I chose things then. And that's actually continues to be how I choose work now. I choose what gives me joy.
And I think that makes sense.
To do that.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense because you're on the set for such a long period of time. You're working with these people, in a sense, they're coworkers for such a long period of time, that if it's not something you're really excited about or you think has even some potential, then like it's almost like, what's the point? Especially because you had options, after your first success.
Yeah, and it's really tough to be on a set that you hate. And it's really tough to do work that you hate doing. It's just, and thank God I don't have to do that. I don't have to do work that I don't like, I don't have to, because it is tough.
How do your new podcast, If I Go Missing, The Witches Did It, how is that different from your prior work, and what have you learned during the production process?
Well, I've never done a scripted podcast before. I've done voiceover work for animation here and there, but this was a gigantic undertaking because, when I'm on set acting, like in person, I have other characters to build my performance around and off of. I have an entire set. I have walls. Like if it could be raining, like I have that. I have the weather. I have everything at my disposal. But when it's like for this podcast, it was just me and the director and the sound guy in a recording booth. And so I had to really call in my imagination for the air around my character, Jenna. And it's definitely takes a lot more concentration to do it than it does when it's on set.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you might look at a podcast as, oh, that appears easier, and then you start going through the process and you're like, wow, this is very challenging. Like I need to, like you're saying, like use your imagination. You have to like think about, what these characters are going through, and it's harder to play off of what you're seeing visually. So yeah. I think that's something that even I haven't even really thought of. I mean, I used to just do all, audio, and now I've switched to video. So I am seeing the comparison.
Yeah, you have to, before it's just like, well, yeah, now you have to think of what the audience is hearing and what the audience is seeing. But when it's just what the audience is hearing, like you really have to be very, very good at what you do. And you have to have like, you know what? You ever listen to a podcast and you're like, ugh, I hate this person's voice.
Yeah.
Because it's like, ugh, your voice is either, whiny or uncharismatic. And so I certainly worried through the process that my voice would be annoying.
Well, you have all that, and it's very entertaining and interesting. But you also do something else with the podcast that I find really important. In what ways have you addressed the issues of race, class, and capitalism in the show?
Right. So Jenna, my character, is one, she's got a boyfriend that is white, and she's Black herself, and he takes her to a space that is mostly white, where like the only people of color around are, they're sort of, they become enemies just a little bit, but she feels isolated. And not just because of her race, but like he takes her to a place where everyone has money and she doesn't. And she's a struggling writer and no one around her seems to be struggling. And there's a lot there. Classes don't always mix. And I learned, because I grew up poor, and it took a while for me to feel comfortable around people who didn't grow up poor and who aren't poor. And so that's what Jenna's going through. But like she's kind of fighting it tooth and nail. Like she doesn't just lie down. She doesn't adapt really well at all. She is fighting tooth and nail. But also she is strange. Well, I wouldn't say strange. She has issues around being a Black woman with a white man, which I get, but I think that she has issues around it through the lens of other people and not really through the lens of herself and her own heart and, in this relationship. But I also think that, class has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. A lot of people talk about race in society, but class is a huge part of that too. And everything's connected. I think that, over the past 1 to 2 years going through a pandemic, I think people have realized that some people were harmed more than others. And, part of that is around like what community you're part of. If you're part of the Hamptons community, you're probably okay because you can just go to your kind of like mansion in there. Whereas if you're part of, more impoverished community, you were more likely to get the virus and suffer financially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's hard to turn to other people because like most of the people that you know are in the same boat as you. And so it's because again, classes don't really cross.
Yeah, it's a really important topic that I don't think is covered enough. And I think you're the right spokesperson to use this medium to be able to get that message across.
But good, I hope so.
And what's your best piece of career advice?
Comfortable shoes. Here's the thing. Like, not only am I an actor, I'm also a director. And when I'm directing and I'm on set all day long, I usually change my shoes and my socks at lunch. And I know that sounds crazy, but another director, Craig Brewer, gave me that advice because like my feet really are achy because you stand and you run around more than you think because I'm running to tell my actor something, I'm running over to the sound, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm looking to make sure things are okay, and my feet get really, really tired. So endurance and really, really comfortable shoes because you're going to be on your feet all day.
Yeah, and you got to just take care of your health. I think that's part of this too, is if you're healthy, you'll have the endurance, you'll be able to go for longer. And even people, it doesn't even matter as much, of course, if you're, a teenager versus someone who's like 60 years old, the energy might not be exactly there. But yeah, if you take care of yourself long term, those healthy habits will pay off and allow you to accomplish more in a day and get less tired.
Yeah, I think so. And also, what is healthy for you and what healthy looks like for you might not look the same on a different person. But as long as you take your own health into account and make sure that you're okay and that, you're eating your vegetables,
Totally.
and you're working on your strength and your endurance, then God bless.
That's great advice. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.